Hello guys, Stos back here again with another video, and in today's video I will be having a lot of tips and tricks if you want to play against Dracotail. So without further ado, let's go right into it. First things first, all Dracotail monsters have an effect that sets when they're fused away, and the spellcasters, as you guys know, the spellcasters only set a card, while the dragons have an additional effect. Mulu can negate a card, Urgula can pop a spell trap, and Pan can pop a monster. This is, everyone knows this, but it's easier to keep in mind if you just think about like spellcasters versus dragons, right? So Lucius is a spellcaster. So Lucius in hand plus any monster, well, including a Dracotail. So if your Lucius resolves, you will ideally be adding 5 mana or adding another monster if you already have 5 mana. But usually you need 5 mana access. So this card will always get 5 mana unless you have 5 mana already. Then you can choose what else to add. You can like add Urgula so that Urgula can add back the 5 mana. And Lucius is a very good starter because if he resolves, it allows you to set up your full end board. The reason that is because Lucius into 5 mana does not lock you. So you can go 5 mana fuse, you fuse 2 monsters in hand, and you go into Arthalion, Arthalion returns back to 5 mana, and then you can go Lucius into Spirit, and then you go Spirit plus the Arthalion into Seal, and then you can play with the trap that you've set, with the spell that you've set, usually Rahu or Ketu. 5 mana can also special summon any dragon or spellcaster monster, not just Dracotails. So you will find game states where you will have to make Secretarion or Mysterion. I will be mentioning some of these game states that happen near the end of the video when I reach those cards to talk about them. But it's important to note that 5 mana can summon any spellcaster dragon and also not lock you. That's why 5 mana is the most important card in the deck, and you want to have access to her every single turn. Not every single game, every single turn. You need the 5 mana in your hand. You need to resolve a 5 mana every single turn. You try to resolve her on the opponent's turn, and you try to get her back on the opponent's turn from the graveyard using Arthalion. The way you win with this deck is not by setting up this unbeatable board. You win by removing your opponent's resources, and 5 mana allows you to do just that. As for Urgula and Pan and Mululu's effects, they're dragons, so they have an additional effect with them, as I've mentioned earlier. Their effect is optional. Keep that in mind. It does not target, so this does not target the monster it wants to negate, and these don't target the card they want to pop. However, it is optional. So to avoid getting sharks, you need to do the effect right as you said. So if you go, for example, Chainlink 1 Lucius, Chainlink 2 Pan, right? And you've set Rahu, then set Ketu, and then you point at the opponent's monster, they can shark you because you were supposed to pop when you set the card with Pan. Instead, you let it go to where you set with Lucius, and all of a sudden you cannot get your pop now. People will shark you, especially if you're playing for either stakes or playing at events. So you have to play correctly. So you have to know that these effects are optional, so they can be missed. That's why you should not misplay with them. Urgula's second effect to place himself usually will target 5 mana, right? This is what everyone knows. However, there will be some game states where you will target Lucius in order to get Lucius back to your hand and non-summon Lucius. This is especially useful if you've used Urgula as interruption in the opponent's turn to like destroy one of the spell traps. And then on your turn, you can go Urgula, add Lucius, normal summon, add 5 mana. And then you have like 5 mana access, but instead of just 5 mana, you have a Lucius on the board as well. That's why it's pretty important. Another thing is it can also target your Gulamel because it targets any spellcaster Dracotail, and Gulamel is a spellcaster Dracotail. So if you have a Gulamel in the grave and you're out of like fusions in a very, very grindy game state, you can go Urgula, return your Gulamel, and return Urgula back to the bottom of the deck. Urgula also needs to return itself to the bottom of the deck in order to place the other card. So if the opponent has Ogre and they Ogre the, not Ogre, if they have Crow and they Crow the Urgula, it will not return the other monster to your hand. However, if they Crow the targeted monster, then the Urgula will at least place itself back to the bottom of the deck. So it's generally considered better to target the Urgula instead of targeting the target with a DD Crow. As for Pan, the effect can be usually useful to get back a Lucius or Mulu on the field, the second effect. However, it only triggers when it's destroyed by card effect. It does not trigger when destroyed by battle. So I see a lot of people triggering it by battle. That's just illegal. It only happens by opponent's card effects. You can't force it by your own card effects. Another cool trick to keep in mind is you can sometimes force the effect to happen. For example, this is just off the top of my head, but if your opponent goes Mitsurugi Ritual, and then they summon an Ame, the one that pops everything, by using 2 monsters from deck or hand or whatever, right? 2 monsters have hit the field at the same time. So your Graveyard Gulamel and Arthalion are like live. So you can go, they can go Chainlink 1 Ame to pop everything, and then you can go Chainlink 2 Gulamel or Arthalion to revive itself. It gets revived, the Ame pops everything, and then Pan can trigger to like let you revive Mulu, Lucas, or 5 mana, but usually it's going to be Mulu and Lucas that you want to revive, right? You can also revive Urgula with Pan, and then Urgula can like be used to pop their spell trap, for example. But that's just one of the many ways that you can outplay your opponent in game states like that. Mululu's effect to fuse is main phase only. This is very important. If the opponent tries to threaten battle phase, you cannot fuse in the opponent's battle phase. So you will have to either chain or at least have a way to deal with the opponent's monster in battle, such as a Dracotail Horn, right? That's why it's very important to keep that in mind. If the opponent goes to their main phase, they have the priority to activate a card or effect first before you're able to fuse. So they can maybe set up something that stops your fuse, which you have to like keep that in mind when you're setting up the Mulu. Its effective fuse also does not have to use itself as material, so you can fuse with other monsters. However, it can only fuse Dracotail monsters. It cannot fuse spellcasters and dragons, unlike 5 mana and Ketu and Cartesia. It only fuses into Dracotail monsters, but the positive of the card is the fact that it is pretty good into hand traps like Veiler and Imper, because you can use the effect on the opponent's turn, and it also cannot be ashed. So there will be game states where you will have like Lucius and Mulu and you're wondering which one to start. A lot of the time, unless you have like Lucius plus other cards and you want to eat the hand trap on Lucius, you will start with Mulu, because if they interact with the Mulu, it's gonna be with an Imperm or Veiler, and then they need to have Imperm Veiler for the opponent's turn, so they need more than one card to trade with your Mulu. And if you guys play this deck, if you play like a bunch of games on this deck, you will realize that you want to go for one trades in this deck. That's what the deck excels at. The deck wants to go into these grind games, these simplified game states where you have your opponent on like 1-2 cards and you like set up a trap or 2 and then set up like a 5 mana, and that way is how you win the game. Having 5 mana set up is very, very important, so you will eventually realize that the deck plays very slow, and it's going to be very weird to adjust to that if you're used to playing like these big explosive decks like Vanquish Soul K9 or like Malice or like Snake Eye back in the day, like these decks that end on these insane boards that the opponent cannot out. This deck is not that. This deck's ceiling is as high as the roof. Like it barely ends on anything, but because you play 20 hand traps, 17 plus 3 5 mana, right? That means that your deck will usually have like a very small combo set up plus 3 hand traps on the hand. That's what the math dictates. 3 or 2 hand traps is what you're looking at drawing. And if you have like 5 mana as your hand trap and you draw into Urgula or the Pans, then that's like even stronger, because the opponent can like activate a card that summons something and you can chain 5 mana using Mululu, and then Mulu on resolution, since it's their turn, will negate a chaining too. Right? As for Cartesia, Cartesia is very underrated in this deck. When I first started playing the deck, I started playing like different variants. And the first variant I played was Dragon Maid Dracotail, and I didn't really like it all that much because A, it had a lot of normal summons, and B, it also felt like if I didn't draw the Dragon Maid engine, my deck was not doing anything. This way to play the deck fixes it. Shout out to Jesse Cotton. This is his deck card for card. I just literally yoinked his deck, played with it, and I've been enjoying it. It's been very successful for me. I've even brought it in money matches, which I will be uploading some of them. Deck has been performing very good. The deck with 20 hand traps can stop the majority of the meta from comboing, and then on your turn, you can just activate one spell and wipe the rest of their cards away. And the reason Cartesia is so good in this deck is because A, it's a spellcaster, so it allows you to make Mysterion and Secretarion, right? It does not have to use itself, and it also does not lock you. It's basically Mulu minus the lock from being able to only summon Dracotails and the lock from fusion monsters. So you can go Cartesia, make your Arthalion with the cards in your hand, and then go Cartesia into Spiritual Dice of Blue, into Seals, and in the end phase, you get the effect of Cartesia to add back every single turn. You can do that every single turn, meaning that your Arthalion will have an extra card to make itself with every single turn, thus giving you a +1. It's basically adding a card from graveyard every single turn for free. As for the spells, Ketu is your strongest spell. Everyone thinks that Rahu is the strongest spell because, hey, haha, branded fusion, right? But this is your strongest spell for 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is it does not lock you. Well, it's basically 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is it doesn't lock you. Rahu locks you into fusions. It does not force you to summon Dracotail, where Rahu forces you to summon Dracotails. And also, and most importantly, I will say, it gives you a +1 on the Arthalion. Because if you go Rahu and you send a monster from hand and a monster from deck, your Arthalion can only target 1. So you get 1 card back from the grave. However, if you go Ketu and add the monster to hand, then fuse with him, then you fuse with 2 monsters in the hand, and your Arthalion can add back 2. And that is a positive trade, because you just used 2 monsters, got back 2 monsters, and the monsters set the cards, and then you can like activate a Rahu or something, and then the deck goes plus. And since the deck ends on more cards than it starts with, when you go for these 1-for-1 trades, you're winning. The only reason Rahu is like very good compared to like, not compared to Ketu, because in my opinion Ketu is just a stronger card, but it's because Rahu is better going first. The opponent will not have cards on the field, so you cannot fuse with Ketu, and that's the negative Ketu, because you cannot always fuse. The way to circumvent that is, if you have like a very strong engine hand, do not use the Ketu. And I will show this in like future videos. I will literally win games because I held my Ketu. I did not use it. I set the Ketu, and I know how people a lot of the time will go. I actually have a video that is going to be uploaded soon, like showing this exact game state. I could have used Ketu to add Pan so that I have like 5 mana for Pan, and I just held it because what if my opponent was holding hand traps and they're waiting for me to use all my Dracotail monsters to be able to like out my hand traps, to out my board, and then they have bodies starting their turn, and I just have traps and 5 mana, which you cannot win that game state. So I just kept Ketu, and by keeping the Ketu, the opponent, after they use their effects, like their Izuna, their Holy Su, their, their Nibirus, you can go Ketu, add Fuse, and you out their board and still set up the same interruption that you would have set if they didn't use their cards, rather than them have to like start their turn with a lot of bodies on the field. And that's very important. You have to play reserved with this deck. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, that's how you beat Dracotail. If they just use all possible cards in effect, Gulamel cannot trigger, and they cannot out your bodies. And if they cannot out your bodies, you can basically win the game. Last thing about the Dracotail main deck is the traps. The only notable things to mention about the traps is the target has to remain on the field in order to apply the effect. So the monster needs to stay on the field. It can be swapped to defense position. It doesn't matter. You still attempt to bounce it. However, it cannot like leave the field, otherwise it will not bounce. Same for Flame. If they chain Droplet removing the spell that you've targeted, the spell will not be negated. So, and if you do not perform the negate or the bounce, you cannot get the draw. Another thing to keep in mind is you always want to like cycle these back. So Horn cycle back Flame, and Flame cycle back Horn, so that you do not run out of these cards in deck. When the new trap comes, it will be like slightly easier. You can maybe like skip on one of the cycles. But until then, we're always just cycling these cards back with each other. Another thing is, these cards can be belled regardless of whether you have a Dracotail card in graveyard or banishment, because these can target banishment as well. So they can always bell your Flame and Horn, even if your graveyard is empty and you're under shifter, right? So keep that in mind. Now for the fusion monsters, some tips and tricks about them. Arthalion will always be used to cycle back cards. It will very, 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 very rarely be used to target cards on the field. another important thing is Arthalion can always be built unless you do not target a card on the grave. So if you go Arthalion, target 2 monsters on the field, or 1 monster on the field if you use 1 card in hand, then the opponent cannot build that. However, if you targeted the card in either grave, right, then they can build it, and the way to play around that is just to chain block the Arthalion. So a lot of the time you will find like chaining 1 Arthalion, chaining 2 one of the dragon's effects that sets, and then chaining 3 the spellcasters, because spellcasters only set, the dragons have additional effects. So if you want to like use their effects and you want them to be protected, you try to usually chain block with the last cards being the spellcasters that set, aka Phimena Lucius. As for the Gulamil needs to be in direct chain to the opponent, to the Dracotail effect that you've activated in order to pop. So a lot of times your opponent will not even let you get the pop, because the moment you activate a Dracotail effect, like let's say you go 5 mana, they will go chain Holy Suit in hand, right? And then you go effects on res, they chain Holy Suit to summon. And then every time you activate a card, they can like just chain a card to prevent you from getting the pop. It's basically like the Thunder Dragon effect. So you have to keep that in mind when you want to use the Gulamil. And a lot of the time you will like find game states where after your opponent like nibs you or something, and you play, you resolve the Gulamil, you get that back to hand, and then you like fuse into Secretarion, revive Lucius effect to add, and then you can go like Gulamil, and that's how you like beat the opponent's bodies in that sort of game state. For Secretarion and Mysterion, Secretarion can recycle your fusions. It doesn't have to target like non-fusion monsters, so you can like go Secretarion, target your Arthalion or Gulamil plus another monster, and as long as you summon the other monster, it can like return these to the extra deck if you're missing on like fusions. So this is one of the few ways, this in Urgula is one of the few ways where you can recycle your fusions. Another thing to keep in mind is Secretarion loses 100 attack per banished card. This usually will come up with Typhon, right? So with Typhon prevents you from using the effects of monsters that have 3,000 or more attack. So when Secretarion loses the 100 per each card, as long as you have 1 banished card, you can use Secretarion's effect. So that's very neat to keep in mind. Same applies to Mysterion. And the only interaction that Secretarion has over Mysterion is the fact that Secretarion can be like, if you have like a spellcaster on the field and spellcaster in hand, you turn the spellcaster on the field to Spirit with Eyes of Blue, and then you can like fuse into Secretarion. Whereas you can't do the same with Mysterion because this locks you into dragons. As for Mysterion, there are some cool interactions with it. The main interaction you have to keep in mind is that it does not need to see the opponent use the monster in order to activate its effect. So, example of a game state, opponent goes normal summon Dormouse effect to banish White Rabbit, and then they go White Rabbit chaining 1. You can chain 5 mana, use a spellcaster and the dragon into Mysterion, new chain resolves, White Rabbit gets summoned, on new chain, chaining 1 White Rabbit, chaining 2 Mysterion, target the White Rabbit, banishing every Cyberse on the field. And that is like a very, very good board wipe versus Malice, where you can like hold and keep holding your effects until you can just banish a lot of their cards on the field, and bam, all of a sudden you're back in the driver's seat. The only thing to keep in mind with that is if you're like playing the mirror and you target like a spellcaster or dragon, you will also banish your dragons and your spellcasters, so your own Mysterion. And also you cannot fuse the Mysterion because it cannot ever be used as fusion material. As for Philia Regis, the card is usually one of your few ways to like remove cards from the opponent's graveyard. It also allows you to like return cards from the field to the hand, like Mulu, or maybe if you have like a Pan or Urgula on the field from seals summoning them, you can return them by banishing a card in your opponent's field. You can also do a play versus talents where they will talents. You will have to chain Philia Regis targeting the talent to bounce the Philia Regis back. Otherwise, they get Philia Regis, and then the Philia Regis on their field will attempt to target one of your cards, right? And that's no bueno, obviously. As for Typhon, the only interaction you have to keep in mind is that if you go Typhon over one of these two that was summoned from the graveyard, that card, when you detach it, will not get banished, so you can like get the effect back next turn. And also, these effects that summon themselves back will make it so that you can use them when you link summon, and you can use them when the opponent link summons. You can use them when the opponent detaches 2 for Nash Knight. That does count as 2 monsters hitting the grave simultaneously. And the main interaction, and this is what I'm gonna end the video with, is that some game states you will go like, you will nib your opponent, and then it's your turn, and you have nib in a hand trap in hand, and all your monsters are in grave, and you're like, yeah, I'm out of engine, and you want to scoop. But there's a very cool play you can do. You can normal summon Fualos or Perulia or whatever hand trap you have in your hand, or card you have in your hand. Normal summon it. Nibiru and the card, well, there we go. So Nibiru and the card will go into Cross Sheep. Cross Sheep on the extra monster zone, and then you will go trigger the Althalia and Gulamel in your graveyard, because you just sent 2 monsters to grave simultaneously. Special summon in the zone of Cross Sheep, and then Cross Sheep can like revive a Mulu or revive a Lucius. You can also revive Cartesia, right? And you can revive these cards to your field and get back your follow-up. Another thing that you can do on your turn, or on the opponent's turn, is you keep the Cross Sheep there, and when you special summon into the zone of the Cross Sheep, then since the Cross Sheep is still pointing towards a fusion monster, you can then revive your cards as well as revive Ogre, which is a very, very cool interaction, because Ogre can use its effect when it's on the field. So if you revive Ogre with the effect of Cross Sheep, right, because it's level 4 or lower monster from your graveyard, you can get to use Ogre back, and you can cycle it indefinitely as long as you can summon monsters to its zone. And that was it. I hope these tips were informative for you guys. That being said, this deck list was made by Jesse Cotton. He did very well with it in YCS Vancouver. I just yonked his list. No shame in that. And that's the list I've been playing. I haven't changed anything about the list yet. That's why I'm going to keep his YouTube video detailing the deck profile, explaining his deck choices and everything in the description below. And with that being said, stay safe. Make sure you guys leave a like, subscribe if you like this type of content, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.